Tom Cameron's wages.
Judd Huntley. David Brennan. John Chen.
Tom Brokaw.
The first big storm of the season, the Midwest socked with snow, and now the ripple effect, an air travel nightmare. The president back home, but now what in Iraq and for the U.S. troops in the war zone? Air America, how much information is the government gathering on you when you fly, and what are they doing with it? And our series, Making a Difference, the woman who has built a national core of young Americans helping the nation's neediest schools.
From NBC News World Headquarters in New York, this is NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams.
Good evening. This has been a very tough day for travelers across America, and tonight winter has now moved in across many areas while dangerous weather is also on the move. All of this part of a massive ripple effect from the first big snowstorm of this season. It cut a path from Texas on up to Michigan, knocking out power, closing schools, burying streets under snow. Tonight, the weather system stretches on up through New England, and it has prompted tornado warnings along the way. Now, on the travel front, more than 1,200 flights were canceled today, nearly half of them at busy O'Hare Airport in Chicago. Countless more were delayed. That meant tens of thousands of airline passengers either never got where they were going or arrived hours late. Things at O'Hare are just now beginning to get back to some semblance of normal. That's where we'll begin our reporting tonight with NBC News correspondent Janet Shamley. And Janet, how are things there now?
They are calming down a little bit from some craziness earlier today, Brian. This storm has passed through, but not before claiming 5 lives over the past 2 days.
The nation's midsection socked in.
Once again, this flight to Cancun, flight 1681, has canceled due to weather.
The season's first big winter storm landing a crippling blow to much of the Midwest, with casualties all over the map.
Eastbound I-70 at this point is impossible.
Freezing rain putting roads in Missouri on ice. 50-mile-an-hour winds whipping in Kentucky. As much as 17 inches of snow paralyzing parts of Wisconsin. And all over, a sudden...
Brian, late today, the governor of Missouri declared a state of emergency for his state. Meanwhile, the snow is ending, but the storm is now moving east, taking with it thunderstorms and very high winds.
Janet Shamley and at Chicago O'Hare. Janet, thank you for that. And now try for a moment to imagine the job of sidelining all that aircraft before the storm hits and then getting them back in the air, back on schedule after it lifts. At Chicago O'Hare, for American Airlines, that job falls to a veteran of the airline business named Frank Stanton, who's been on the job since very early this morning. Here is a part of his day in his own words.
My day started at 4:20 this morning, and that's coming in and making sure we have personnel and that our contractors are plowing the runways, the taxiways, etc. The unique thing about today's operation was having a disabled aircraft off one of the runways that limited us and not being able to fully use arrival rate here in Chicago. On a typical day, we have around 248 departures. Today, we're operating somewhere in the neighborhood of 37. We made that decision early, that limit the amount of people that will be coming to the airport. You know, you have to be sharp. The people that you're working with, be sharp. And you take your experience based on what you have that day, and you make the best of it. And hopefully that's, you know, not causing any undue inconvenience for our passengers, and you're operating safely. I will sleep good tonight because I'm tired. And knowing that, you know, we made a contribution.
Frank Stanton, the ramp tower manager for American Airlines at O'Hare, Chicago, in his own words. As we said, this storm system has had a ripple effect at airports across this country, including here at the New York City airports, just as our traveling team was trying to get back from Amman, Jordan. We were there covering the meeting between President Bush and the Prime Minister of Iraq. The question tonight is, after that very high-profile event, Where do things stand for Americans in Iraq? We are joined now by NBC News Chief White House correspondent David Gregory, also back home tonight in Washington at the White House. David, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. White House officials say the president will make his decisions about course corrections in Iraq before Christmas. But despite the expectation of major change there, officials insist that the president's core war strategy is sound. Following the Jordan summit with Iraqi Prime Minister Maliki, the White House said today the president will step up his diplomatic efforts to strengthen the Iraqi leader. Monday, Mr. Bush will meet with one of Iraq's most important Shiite leaders, Abdul Aziz al-Hakim, and will sit down with Iraqi Vice President Tariq al-Hashemi, a Sunni, in January. It's an effort, aides say, to keep up pressure on Iraq's political leaders to end the bloodletting. Leading Democrats, however, remain critical, saying the president was wrong this week to give an open-ended commitment on U.S. troop presence.
It's wrong. Takes the pressure off the Iraqis to do what only they can do, which is to work out a political agreement, which is the only way to end this thing.
With spiraling violence, members of both parties are pushing the White House for a viable exit strategy. Sources say the Baker-Hamilton Commission will recommend setting a goal of 2008 for complete troop withdrawal. But that is just a goal, not a deadline. All week, the president appeared unwilling to give up on his objectives for Iraq and rejected timelines.
It's in our interest to help liberty prevail in the Middle East, starting with Iraq. And that's why this business about graceful exit just simply has no realism to it at all.
Bush advisors have seized on the Baker Group's lack of a specific timeline to argue the group's final report may put more pressure on Democrats to revise their calls for rapid troop withdrawal. The larger and still unanswered question is whether the Baker Group can persuade Mr. Bush to define success more modestly than a democratic Iraq.
They are saying that we no longer have a chance of achieving the central goal that the president had set for us.
For now, however, the president appears to be dug in. A senior advisor said tonight that as bad as things appear in Iraq, the president's going to continue to work the political angle because, this advisor says, the president believes that Maliki is his best hope. Brian?
David Gregory at the White House this Friday night. David, thanks for that. And once again, Lebanon is now a crisis point in the Middle East tonight. There were massive protests there today in the streets of Beirut aimed at ousting the government there, which is, by the way, backed by the United States. NBC News Beirut Bureau Chief Richard Engel is on post and joins us tonight with the latest. Richard, good evening.
Good evening, Brian. As you can see behind me, those demonstrations are continuing. Now the protesters have set up tents so that they can spend the night in the streets and maintain pressure on the government. Earlier today, at one stage, there were as many as 1 million Hezbollah supporters in downtown Beirut. They are demanding that the current pro-American government be toppled. They say it is nothing more than an American puppet. Tonight, the Prime Minister of Lebanon is holed up in his office, surrounded by hundreds of guards and barbed wire and APCs. He says that Hezbollah is trying to stage a coup and force his country into an alliance with Syria and Iran. Brian, this great struggle between America and Iran is now being played out in the streets of Beirut.
Richard Engel in Beirut tonight. We will have to keep watching the situation in Lebanon. A bizarre scene in Mexico early this morning. That nation's new president, Felipe Calderón, a conservative, had to slip onto stage in a hurry to take the oath of office because lawmakers have been brawling in the chamber literally for days. Members of the Mexican Congress were openly coming to blows, shoving and hitting each other. Calderón's narrow victory is in dispute. His opponent claims the election was fraudulent. The strange story of that former Russian spy's death got even more strange today with word that his Italian contact had tested positive for the very same radioactive poison. As NBC's Donna Friesen reports, as the trail spreads, this mystery deepens.
Exactly 1 month ago, these two men met at a London sushi bar. Now Alexander Litvinenko is dead and Mario Scaramella is in the hospital.
Tests have detected.
Joined the FBI in assisting British investigators to shed whatever light they can on this sinister murder mystery. Donna Friesen, NBC News, London.
And when Nightly News continues after a break here this Friday night, new concerns tonight about what the government is doing with the private information it gathers on the American flying public. And later, a woman who had a good idea in her dorm room and is now making a difference at schools that need help the most. We are back now with NBC News In Depth. Tonight, it's about privacy. Many people may not realize it, but since 9/11, the government has been monitoring and gathering data on just about every person entering the U.S. And now there are concerns about what the government is doing with all the information it gathers. More now from our NBC News Justice correspondent, Pete Williams.
Each of the more than 400 million times a year that U.S. citizens and foreign travelers enter the U.S. News, Washington.
And still ahead after a break here on NBC Nightly News, we'll go to a place where a lot of Detroit auto workers are starting over. They say there is such a thing as a second shot at the American dream.
Rock and the Gates nomination hearings. Tim Russer talks exclusively with Senators Warner and Levin of the Armed Services Committee, only on Meet the Press.
Shocking FBI tapes. NBC Nightly News Monday.
Dateline Saturday. Teens unleash NBC 8/7 Central.
More bad news today for Ford, the #2 U.S. automaker. For the second time this year, and only the second time ever, the Japanese automaker Toyota outsold Ford in the U.S. Toyota says it sold more than 196,000 cars and trucks last month, 15,000 more than Ford was able to sell. When the U.S. auto industry has problems, the impact, of course, is felt most deeply in Michigan, where thousands of workers have faced layoffs in recent years and where the buyouts continue as we speak. Some have taken their place on the unemployment line, while others have gone out of their way to search for new work, and they've found it in a state that has gone out of its way to search for them. NBC's Kevin Tibbles has our report.
The old frontier spirit that built this country is alive and well in Wyoming. Towns like Gillette were settled during America's first westward migration. Today, it's a magnet for a new sort of pioneer. From Michigan, note the Detroit Lions hard hat.
The wind is a lot stronger out here. There's no trees to stop it.
But not as strong as the cold wind of unemployment chilling Ed Lambert's hometown of Flint. He came west to build houses. Note the Detroit Tigers ball cap.
My wife getting pregnant, starting a new family, needed work, needed money. And Wyoming, they said, is booming, so I took a chance, drove out here.
With its energy industry booming, Wyoming has more jobs than workers.
We have dried up the labor pool within Wyoming and surrounding states around here. We have taken and grabbed everyone that we can.
When Wyoming...
New York on Wall Street today, the Dow was off nearly 28 points, NASDAQ down almost 19. For the week, the Dow lost 86 points, NASDAQ was down 47 and change. We'll be back in a moment with the story of a once outlandish idea and how it has worked its way into American life.
Seahawks, Broncos, Hasselbeck and Alexander are back.
They've loaded the ship. Pressure's on Seattle.
The battle has begun. Sunday Night Football on NBC.
Want more nightly news? On Monday, NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams will have limited commercial interruptions. Brought to you by Philips, Sense and Simplicity. Making a difference. Brought to you by Levitra.
Finally tonight, in our weekly segment about people who are making a difference, one woman's mission to help some of the nation's most vulnerable children get a good education. What started out as a small idea, young people teaching other young people, a program called Teach for America, is so big now. It's as selective in picking young people to be teachers as Ivy League schools are in deciding who can be students. And as NBC's Ann Thompson reports, it is making a difference for children and teachers alike.
I want you to think.
This story is about the power of an idea to use the Bronx.
And that's our broadcast for this Friday night and for this week. Thank you for being with us. John Siegenthaler will be here with you this weekend. I'm Brian Williams. I'll see you back here on Monday night for, by the way, a special nightly news broadcast on Monday with limited commercial interruption. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Saturday on Today, The Brain Game. True or false? Can a video game sharpen your memory? Think fast. The answer.